I think about neocolonialism and the state of the neocolonialized, I am saddened because neocolonialism exists in an environment where you think you are free, but you are not.
Today I'm going to start a 3-part video series to talk about monetary and financial imperialism. When I look at the definition and example of neocolonialism and neo-imperialism, I find that monetary financial imperialism actually contains many elements of colonialism. And it is a way to colonize a country or region without the population knowing that they are being colonized. So I'm going to bring back Professor Wan here again. I checked out many scholar intellectual videos in China, and I think still Professor Wan has one of the most inclusive way of putting the grand picture together to talk about this neo-imperialism. And he also used a relatively speaking unbiased perspective from a global south perspective again. For my Western audience, it's probably going to be a little bit difficult to swallow. Oh, before I go into the content of today's video, I want to talk about the message and email I have been receiving lately. A few of them are claimed to be ex-employees of some US 3-letter agencies, and other from other YouTube content creators, big ones also with over 100,000 subscribers, warning me some of the things that I say in my channel is inappropriate, and they got into trouble and shadow banned. So they want to kindly remind me to be careful with those topics. And I understand, but the thing is that if I avoid these topics completely, I won't be able to get to my point. But if I do it too much, yes, there's a chance that I will get into trouble and my channel will be removed. So what I'm gonna do is this. So let's assume those issues are a black hole, all right? If you dive too deep into it, you get sucked in. So today in this video series, I'm gonna take our starship, the USS Enterprise here, and then I'm gonna take an entry dive into the black hole, all right? I'm gonna show you guys a bit of a history, how we get to where we are. And in the second video, I'm gonna swing by the event horizon of the black hole, showing you guys a few cases of what is ongoing today, not in detail, but from a more bird-eyes perspective. And then I'm gonna swing out to the other side, and perhaps in the third video, if my channel survives, I will talk about some of the pros and cons with the current system we're living in, and maybe perhaps we can draw some recommendation to how to fix this problem in a peaceful way. So I know there's a lot of people, I can tell from my comment section, they roughly know what I'm talking about here. There are also people who are extremely confused as well. So for people who watch my videos and they're still confused and they want to seek more answers and ask me for more detail, sorry, I'm not going to answer. If you are interested, go do your own investigation and look into the problem. This is not why I start this channel again. And I know that people, for example, Christina Aguilera here got her channel removed, I think twice, and many of the videos removed. And Voldemort here also just got his bank account removed. So I don't want to end up like them. I respect them, but I would try to avoid getting myself into trouble. And I also want my audience to have a more pleasant experience instead of digging out and exposing different kind of secrets. And I don't know that much, to be honest. So just don't come over and mess with me. Anyways, one last thing before I dive into today's video content. When we try to improve our standard of living, all human beings that is, there's only 3 ways to do it. And everything comes down to this three method. The first method is to make it yourself. If you want food, you grow your own food, you raise your own cattle, you want table furniture, you cut your own wood and bash those wood together to make a table. And if you need minerals, you dig your own ore, processes, and make your own steel. That's it. Second method is to trade for it. If you don't have oil, you have to go to a country to ask and trade for oil. If you want seafood and you're a landlocked country, you have to go to a country with access to ocean, have them fish out some lobsters or crabs, and you buy it and trade it from them. Now, the third method is to steal it or rob it or take it by force. And this is usually things get more inventive and creative. And the simple thing is that, for example, I'm starving to death. I don't care. I just need your food, even if it means I have to kill you for it. Another example is for God. God is almighty. There's nothing God cannot do. But he needs your money. So I need your donation. Thank you. But hey, remember, God is almighty. And of course, you will have eternal life. There's a joke in China in which that during a festival, the first few person get to go into the temple and make offering to the god. It's very expensive to get to be the first one who go in. You have to pay sometimes millions to be the first person who make the offering. And usually there's a saying that the person who is willing to pay the most to go in first are also the ones that have done most evil deeds and most corruptions. So if I'm some kind of Chinese IRS agent, I would just sit by the corner and just see who comes in first. I would go, did you pay your taxes? Really? And yeah, that's the case. And I also wonder, is it why all those drug cartels in Latin America and, for example, also mafia, is that why they're very dedicated Catholics? Who knows? They make a lot of donations sometimes. Oh, this wand I got for my daughter from Universal Studios here in Los Angeles. $70 each for this piece of wood. I bet the suppliers sold to them for perhaps $2 a piece. And then when the Chinese tourists come, they sell it right back to them for $70. Is this considered trade or rob? I don't know. You tell me. In ancient China, an invasion war is usually launched by tribal forces from the north. It is a kind of raiding and plundering culture that also exists in Europe, for example, the Vikings. As we move into the past few centuries, the conflicts and wars between countries became more frequent and more deadly. When global capitalism emerged, more clashes happened between nation states, and many of these wars carry the same raiding and plundering culture at its core. So imperialism and colonialism are the two forms of expression which carry the same raiding and plundering culture, but is spread and projected across the planet. He says that many of the European powers, from his perspective, was the one, carry this core culture element at its foundation. I want to add something here. This kind of plundering culture doesn't really exist in Chinese history that much. I know some other people try to point out that Chinese also have that, and I tried really hard to find it. It's not really being debated that much. Maybe there's a bit during Han Dynasty when we expand into Xinjiang over 2,000 years ago. But even that, it is really not considered raiding, plundering, because there's really nothing there. China is very geographically isolated in the Asian world, and our history is not as dynamic as the Mediterranean history. For example, we can put people in a boat, and then we can go to Japan, for example. But what is there to rob and steal? Everything Japanese have on their island, we have something more and then better in China. So there's not really a drive, a purpose to go there. And in the north and west, is all grasslands for nomads. Really nothing there for us to rob. That's if we can even find them and chase them down. They ride on horseback and run very quickly. And if we get to chase them down, what is on them? That is worth robbing or plundering, right? And then to the south, there are valuable gemstones and jewelries and tropical foods, but fruits rot and stones and jewelry, they are in demand, but we can always trade something for it. It's not really worth it to go there and start a war and plunder the place. So that's the case. We are very isolated. There's no point for us to go around and plunder. So this geographical isolation prevented China from developing this kind of plundering culture, this kind of aggressive expansion conquest culture. It's not saying that we're angels, but it's like Darwinism. We just don't evolve that way because there's no need to evolve in that direction. There's no benefit. As we enter the last few centuries, Professor here divided the evolution of colonial imperial era into 4 stages surrounding this plundering culture. I know this is a description that might offend some of my Western audience, but the history we learn, the Western history, is very sugar-coated with righteousness and this and that. And China and many of the global South do not see history that way, or at least we come to develop our own way of seeing history. To many of us in the global South, this Nazi or fascist, these terms mean very little to us. It's just a bunch of imperialist power fighting among themselves for resources and lands and colonies around the world. Winner gets to call loser different kind of names. So let's go into the first stage. European imperial colonists fought for control over the sea and colonial territory. 2 continents suffered the most, North America and Australia, in which almost the entire native population were wiped out and European settlers replaced them. That's what we consider complete colonization and occupation, with the indigenous people getting wiped out completely. South America and Africa also suffer a lot, but not as much. So yes, they were being colonized as well, but there are many native people among the population even today that did not get mass murdered. This is example of genocide, real genocide, okay, when we're talking about Australia and North America. Asia is what we consider the least affected by the colonization process. We're the continent with the biggest amount of indigenous population. You see, Chinese are indigenous people. Well, I never studied in Europe, but in US history, we don't talk that much about the cruelty of American settlers towards the native Indians, unless you go really deep into sub-branches of your classes, okay? I'm not sure if Europeans read history about their colonial background and how they describe it. So Europeans have to tell me about it. Now, this is where things get interesting, all right? According to Professor Wong here, Western history talk about the raiding and plundering culture, this colonialism mentality. This is why many global South countries, when we study history written by Westerners, we thought that by adapting their system, Western system, we can reach their standard of living. This is, however, a big mistake. Okay, let's see what he says here. You look at the world today. Why are there so many countries stuck in this so-called middle income trap? Some are even going backward, like Argentina. Now we really need to understand all these stages in order to get to the answer, right? That was the stage 1. Now we go into stage 2. During the early colonial era and industrial era, European Western power accumulated massive amount of capital and resources. War became more vicious, which eventually led to World War I and World War II. Both World War I and World War II today has been sugarcoated and dressed up to be some kind of right versus wrong But Professor Wang here see it differently. Professor Wang see that both World War is a result of human greed, violence on full display. Industrialized Western country reuse this new manufacturing killing tools, tanks, planes, cannons, to redistribute the resources of this planet among them. World War II resulted in two opposite parties, the Soviet and the US, the Cold War. Well, this is what made Professor Wang's video slightly difficult to digest, because we're being fed all these good defeating the bad narrative, which many people watching this video will still argue with me because I see them all the time in the comment section. But look at it this way. Imagine we are looking at history thousands of years ago. All these wars fought, back then. Who is good? Who is really bad from today's perspective? Imagine now that we are people thousands of years into the future, okay? And we are looking at these two world wars. Can we still say who's good and who's bad? Maybe it is just a bunch of people fighting for interest, rights, and resources. And when we are talking about people looking from the global south perspective, for example, if you look at Japanese cruelty against Chinese and other Asian countries during World War II, German cruelty against the Slavic people and the Jews, yes, they're very bad. But also, if you look at, for example, British cruelty against many of its colonies, and then French cruelty throughout African history, even exists today in many African countries, and also American cruelty to the native Indians, and even today, the invasive intervention into Central and South American politics, and also many intervention around the planet. They're all quite cruel, to be honest. People from the West can debate all they want about who is the lesser evil, but to most of the global South, they're all brutal oppressors at one point. Doesn't matter how they sugarcoat the things, okay? Do you guys know that when South America tried to host BRICS Summit, I think it's back in 2023, I forgot, and China tried to invite France there just for goodwill, the entire African community was deeply shocked why China is inviting France, and was extremely mad for a while at China too, okay? How can Chinese invite the French? Their eyes were burning holes into the jackets of the, Chinese representative, and China have to back off. So I went and watched some YouTube videos of Africans talking about French colonialism and even ongoing today. And oh boy, yeah, it does sound very, very bad. And yeah, you French people are very, very naughty.
The colonialist does not change his character. What he does is to wear different masks. And you ought to be very careful not to think that he has changed and that his character will change. You've got to remember that his agenda remains one.
Now we'll jump into stage 3. It's where we are right now. This is where my audience need to pay the closest attention to, okay? After the Cold War, we end up unipolar world led by the United States of America, in which US no longer need to use the brutal traditional method to obtain wealth and harvest the planet. This is the era in which US, being the unipolar power, push forward with globalization and global financial integration. Instead of using old colonial tools, US use financial instruments to harvest the asset, profit, and surplus of the world. Any country who resists this unipolar financial harvest will face the wrath of the United States through direct war or sanction or other things like regime change and so on. So the unipolar power, the United States of America, often drag the old buddies along together the Australians and the British, or sometimes the French, dress in different clothings, sometimes in NATO clothing, sometimes they even dress in UN suit, for example, the Korean War. So they dress in NATO clothing, for example, in Yugoslavia and also in Libya. Let me repeat again. When a country refused to allow US to harvest its resources and wealth, US will demonize that country, saying they are dictators, they're axis of evil, they have weapons of mass destruction, they're doing genocide and the enemy of democracy and freedom and all that. This is to build up the legitimacy to go to war or sanction such country and justify many brutal actions against that country.
We have to know that sometimes people will open the door for you and leave it open, sometimes they won't. And then you need to kick that fucking door down. Excuse my language.
So let's quickly summarize the 3 stages. The first stage, grab the land and resources. If the indigenous people get in the way, just terminate them or turn them into slave workers. The second stage, as Western countries start to industrialize and lead to a continuation of intensive conflict to redistribute the resources and land using advanced and deadly weaponry that led to World War I and World War II. And it kind of continued also during the Cold War. The third stage we're in now is to use financial instruments to serve as a tool of plundering. Military weapons are only used as a door opener, just like Kamala Harris says. Harvesting the wealth from global south countries and forcing everyone to stay in the dollar system. The professor said that we're also going into a fourth stage, in which stage 3 and stage 4 kind of intertwine. United States are not able to successfully harvest China from financial means because China's monetary and financial barriers are too difficult to take down. And also its banking system is also totally homegrown. It makes it extremely resilient to US harvesting. We're now in a technology war, this stage 4, in which US need to protect and guard its core technology, mainly surrounding its chips and AI technology, and prevent its technology and also any technology from the Western world from reaching China. In this fourth stage, which I will say began last decade, but in full swing after Cold and Ukraine war. So right now we're in a financial, technology, and also media hybrid war is where we are in right now. Before I end my video today, I want to say to my audience that I'm not someone who says Black Lives Matters and go off and vandalize the statue of George Washington because he was a slave owner. It is for the sake of our own conscience to show compassion, understanding, and forgiveness to those who come before us, our ancestors, to show sympathy towards their actions as they came from a different era, faced different circumstances and temptations. So those that come after us may also forgive us for the crimes we committed towards each other on this planet. However, that shall not be an excuse for us to not seek the root causes of today's global tension and the urgency to find a peaceful solution together for the problems that we face. We're all stuck on this same planet. We cannot afford another great war. I will end my video here today. I will see you guys in my next video.